folded like a Miami condo, and suspended Weigel without pay for a month and denounced the offending retweet as a gross violation of their values, free speech apparently not being one of them. Then a third Post reporter offered up the idea, of course on Twitter, because why do anything privately, that, hey, maybe everyone was overreacting and we should all just calm down. And then it was really on. Felicia demanded that the Post discipline him and tweeted about that. I assume she's tweeting about this right now. For days, she raged with the fire of 1,000 burning bras. Sending a gazillion tweets calling for more to be done against Weigel, mocking her bosses, attacking colleagues, and letting the world know how much the Washington Post sucked. And this endless bickering and infighting continued online in public view until the bell rang and they all went to seventh period.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, Ayn Rand Tuesday, August the 15th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have nonprofit news, my take, what they should be doing, no free lunch, the rape of the mind, Mike Pence, Senator Tim Scott, Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, jd-vance, and Ayn Rand's philosophy, Who Needs It? All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
gentlemen, distinguished guests, and my fellow citizens, America's comeback starts right now.
From the land of the free and the brave, USA, I love my country, they can't take that away. Against all odds, it made fortune and fame. Legendary. Us patriots won't let you lock him away. Trump say the USA. Trump say the USA. Trump say the USA. Trump, he say the USA. Oh yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. Red, white, and blue. 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 Trump say the USA. Trump say the USA. Trump say the USA.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 economic truths from David-Bahnsen.
The case for individual freedom rests chiefly on the recognition of the inevitable and universal ignorance of all of us concerning a great many of the factors on which the achievement of our ends and welfare depend. It is because every individual knows so little, and in particular because we rarely know which of us knows best, that we trust the independent and competitive efforts of many to induce the emergence of what we shall want when we see it. Humiliating to human pride as it may be, we must recognize that the advance and even the preservation of civilization are dependent upon a maximum of opportunity for accidents to happen. F.A. Hayek. The benefits that come to all of us individually out of the combined wisdom of the market is itself a miracle of the market. The state lacks the independence or competitive drivers to produce or facilitate production of what betters the society. And so does any one individual. But the marketplace as a whole, possessing the dispersed knowledge of individuals, operated with freedom and competitive drivers, unleashes the innovations that have made our lives better time and time again.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservatives' suggested federal political priorities? Number 1, recognize that the government has no rights. 2, defund Planned Parenthood. 3, replace the Affordable Care Act. 4, institute zero-based budgeting. 5, prohibit collective bargaining for all public employees. 6, assign criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. 7, immediately repeal the Patriot Act. 8, immediately repeal all emergency dictator laws. 9, reinstate writs of outlawry. 10, use taxpayer funds to sponsor recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. 11, create a flexible minimum wage. 12, means test health care. 13, immediately and permanently prohibit investment banking by any office holder. And 14, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart-Varney's My Take.
On February the 3rd, 2021, a tape emerged of Donald Trump demanding Georgia's Secretary of State, quote, find 11,780 votes, end quote. That was the precise number needed to change the state's election results into a win for Trump. That phone call is a prime piece of evidence in the latest Trump indictment. Fannie Willis, the Fulton County, Georgia prosecutor, has spent the last 2.5 years building a very wide-ranging case. She accuses the former president and 18 others, including Rudy Giuliani, of running a racket designed to change the election results in Georgia. Now, look, this sets up an extraordinary situation, a clash between the political calendar of the campaign and the court calendar. Is it fair to pile up court dates so the leading GOP candidate cannot effectively campaign? Trump trials are scheduled for January, March, and May of next year. The Georgia case has not been formally scheduled. The prosecutor wants it early next year. Throughout this time, the presidential campaigns will be in full swing. If he's sitting in court for weeks at a time, how can Trump campaign effectively? He should get fair trials, and we should get fair elections. The Georgia case is a state case. That means, if convicted, no president or governor can pardon Trump. And it means the trial will be televised. That guarantees a circus. The country surely doesn't want this, but this is what the country is going to get. To me, it just doesn't seem right. Stuart-Varney.
And that was Stuart-Varney. And again, he's talking about how it just doesn't seem right, but he loves every second of it because it makes him rich. Every time something like this happens, dollar signs flash in his eyes. When people die, he makes money. When people get indicted, he makes money. He's a greedy F. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Wild accusation and black magic. Wild accusation and black magic, like all the other taming tools of totalitarian, are nothing new. But in primitive civilizations and in prehistoric times, the craft of black magic was rather simple. The shaman had merely to destroy or mutilate a small statuette of the accused criminal, to point or thrust a special stick at the man himself, or to curse and berate him with furious words and gestures in order to bring the victim to collapse in death. In his blind acceptance of the magic ritual, the victim was possessed by fear, and often he gave himself up to the spell and just died. Malinowski. This magic slaying of the foe has plural psychological implications. The victim of the magic spell was often looked upon as the representative of the tribal god, the internalized authority and father. He must be killed because his very existence aroused guilt and remorse among his people. His death may silence the inner voices in every man which warn against impending downfall. Sometimes the victim comes from a different tribe than that of his accusers. In this situation, the stranger is an easier scapegoat, and punishing him serves to still the clash of ambivalent feelings in the members of the killing tribe. Hate for an outsider checks and deflects the hate and aggression each man feels towards his own group and toward himself. The more fear there is in a society, the more guilt each individual member of the society feels. The more need there is for internal scapegoats and external enemies. Internal confusion looks for discharge in outside wars. In totalitarian, the air is full of gossip, calumny, and rumor. Any accusation, even if it is false, has a greater influence on the citizenry than subsequent vindication. Bills of particulars made out of whole cloth are manufactured against innocents, especially against former leaders who have been able to develop some sort of personal esteem and loyalty among their friends and followers. Trumped-up charges made against us always revive unconscious feelings of guilt and induce us to tremble. In our analysis of the psychological forces that lead prisoners of war and other political victims to confession and betrayal, we saw how strongly the sense of hidden guilt and doubt in each man impels him, under strain, to surrender to the demands and ideologies of the enemy. This same mechanism is at work constantly among the citizens of totalitarian. Accusations against others remind him of his own inner rebellions and hostilities, which he does not dare to bring out into the open. And so the accused, even when he is innocent, becomes the scapegoat for his private sense of guilt. Cowardice makes the other citizens of our mythical country turn away from the victim, lest they be accused themselves. The very fact that character assassination is possible reveals the frailty and sensitivity of human sympathy and empathy. Even in free democratic societies, political campaigns are often conducted in an atmosphere of extravagant accusation and even wilder counteraccusation. The moment the strategy of wild accusation, with all its disagreeable noises of vituperation and calumny, begins, we forget the strategic intention behind the words and find ourselves influenced by the shouting and name-calling. Maybe, we say to ourselves, there is something in this story. This, of course, is just what the slanderer wants. In the minds of the politicians, the illusion still persists that the end justifies the means. But campaigns of slander produce paradoxical results because the very fact that an unfounded accusation has been made weakens the moral sense of both listener and accuser.
Thank you. So listening to Stuart-Varney, and I knew this was going to be a rough day anyways, but listening to Stuart-Varney, the whole news, of course, is about Donald Trump and the indictment in Georgia. Now, hopefully, this is going to be the last of them. That there's supposed to be, I guess, 4 indictments, a couple in Florida, one in New York, and one in Georgia. And so hopefully this will be the last one. But what it reminds me of is our need for nonprofit news. We must have nonprofit news. What happens here is the Democrats end up playing the Republicans like a drum. They play Sean Hannity like a drum. They play Stuart-Varney like a drum. They play Fox like a drum because what they know that for-profit news means that they come out with worthless indictments. They come out and they do things that are really not news, but that will generate eyeballs. People want to watch. Anything that where Donald Trump's name is involved, everybody wants to rush to see what's going on. Let's see the indictment. Let's see the district attorney announcing the indictment. Let's see what Donald Trump's response is. It's all entertainment and has nothing to do with news. If we had nonprofit news, then Fox News could say, you know what, there's about 5 seconds worth of news here. But Stuart-Varney went on and on and on, I think for half an hour. He's probably going to talk about it in his My Take. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't, of course, again, Donald Trump is a ratings guy, and he gives everybody a boost in the ratings. And so the left knows that the only thing that they have to do is indict Donald Trump, and what will happen is Fox News will force feed all of this crap to their viewers, demoralize their viewers, and that Fox News ends up carrying the water for our enemies. And in so being, Fox News ends up becoming our enemy. Again, what is the solution? It is non-profit news. Walter Cronkite was not Walter Cronkite because he was an exceptional person, because he had exceptional character. Walter Cronkite was who he was, and so were his contemporaries. There's 2 other networks going on. You had Roger Mudd and another person, I don't remember who it was, but Roger Mudd and whatnot were who they were. They were reliable, and that's what makes America great again, is reliability. And they were reliable precisely because news was non-profit. It was offered as a service. So, and this was the same thing with local news. Local news wasn't a profit generating enterprise either. So the concentration was on integrity. Integrity, credibility, reliability. Okay, so news agencies could look at something and say, well, this is fluff. We're not going to announce it. We're not going to put this on the news. We're not going to broadcast this because it's fluff. Or we're going to only broadcast part of it because only part of it is news and the rest of it is just entertainment value. So they had integrity, and so you could take what they said to the bank. If Walter Cronkite told you something, you took it to the bank. He was absolutely solid and reliable. And again, not because he was Walter Cronkite, but because the news was non-profit. So we don't have to have the crap that we've got going on today, where the left leads the right around by the nose, greed, knowing they're greedy, and just hanging money out whenever and wherever they can to get their right to do their bidding. We don't have to have that, at least in the media. All we have to do is encourage and promote non-profit news. And when we get to more and more places, and that's what's going to happen, because people are sick and tired of entertainment, and no news. We want news, not entertainment. So anyways, when we get to that point, then the news will be reliable again, and then we won't have to, I don't know where we're going to have to, right now we take everything Stuart-Varney and other people on the television say with a grain of salt. They're rumor mongers, they're entertainers, they're clowns, and that's it. And that's sad and really too bad for us as consumers and as citizens. So, nonprofit news is the answer. Back in a minute. Thank you. So, with regards to the indictment in Georgia, this is what should be happening. Number one, all of the district attorneys, New York, Georgia, and Florida should be voted out of office, obviously. Nobody wants what's going on. These are rogue district attorneys that are acting on their own. They're not acting on behalf of the people in their counties. Number one. Number two, the judges have a role to play here. All the judges should dismiss these charges with prejudice so they can never be brought back again. Furthermore, these judges then should go ahead and turn around and get the district attorneys right there in their courtroom when they dismiss these charges and find these district attorneys in contempt of court for filing frivolous charges. Fine them to the maximum extent of the law. If possible, put them in jail for 3 days as well. Furthermore, these judges should also go ahead and go to the disciplinary committees of each state's bar and seek to get these district attorneys disbarred. This is what they should be doing. Back in a minute. Thank you. So now I'm going to play Mike Pence's pitch or his announcement. That's what it is. His announcement to the United States, to the voters of the United States, that he is running for President of the United States. I don't think that I played this before, so this is kind of a catch-up thing. I know he did this some months ago, and it's a bit late, but I figure better late than never.
The land of opportunity, beacon of democracy, the shining city on the hill, land of the free, home of the brave, the United States of America. As a son of the heartland, grandson of an Irish immigrant, those aren't just words. My family has lived the American dream. I had the great honor to serve in Congress, as governor, and as your vice president. And I'll always be proud of the progress we made together for a stronger, more prosperous America. But today, our country's in a lot of trouble. President Joe Biden and the radical left have weakened America at home and abroad. The American dream is being crushed under runaway inflation. Wages are dropping. Recession is looming. Our southern border is under siege, and the enemies of freedom are on the march around the world. And worse still, timeless American values are under assault as never before. We're better than this. We can turn this country around, but different times call for different leadership. Today, our party and our country need a leader that'll appeal, as Lincoln said, to the better angels of our nature. I have long believed to whom much is given, much will be required. My family and I have been blessed beyond measure with opportunities to serve this nation, and it'd be easy to stay on the sidelines. But that's not how I was raised. That's why today, before God and my family, I'm announcing I'm running for President of the United States. We can bring this country back. We can defend our nation and secure our border. We can revive our economy and put our nation back on a path to a balanced budget, defend our liberties, and give America a new beginning for life. President Reagan described us as a shining city on the hill. And above all, he called on Americans to renew optimism and believe in themselves again, to believe in each other. Every time our nation has produced leadership that has called upon this country to do hard things, the American people have always risen to the challenge. And we will again. We just need government as good as our people to do it. I believe in the American people, and I have faith. God is not done with America yet, and together we can bring this country back, and the best days for the greatest nation on earth are yet to come. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
And that was Mike Pence, and I noticed that he, I'll just leave it at that. Mike Pence's announcement for his announcing that he's running for President of the United States. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Tim Scott.
I'm about to say something really controversial in Joe Biden's America. If you're able-bodied, you work. If you take out a loan, you pay it back. And if you commit a violent crime, you go to jail. And if you're a man, you should play sports against men. America needs more victors and less victims. I'm Tim Scott, and I approve this message because these aren't just conservative values. They're American values. And as president, I will defend them.
And that was Senator Tim Scott. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Donald Trump.
When I get back into the Oval Office, we will totally obliterate the deep state. We will establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to declassify and publish all documents on deep state spying, censorship, and corruption. By the way, they spied on my campaign. They got caught. Can you imagine if let's take Barack Hussein Obama. Let's say we spied on his campaign, you got caught. What do you think would happen? You think it would just be some stories? In only a few newspapers, because most of them don't even want to write it. They would have brought back the electric chair. That's what they would have done. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. Unequal justice. And I will require every federal employee to pass a new civil service test. How about the president? Let's start with the president. Demonstrating an understanding of our Constitution. To stop the local Marxist prosecutors who release rapists and murderers while persecuting conservatives. On day one of my new administration, I will direct the DOJ to investigate every radical district attorney and attorney general in America for their illegal, racist, in reverse enforcement of the law. Say we spy.
And that was former President Donald Trump. Lots and lots of promises. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy.
That brings me to my second announcement that I'm going to make today. This is an announcement of a letter that my campaign has sent to every other campaign in this race, to Mike Pence, to Nikki Haley, to Larry Elder, to RFK Jr., to Marianne Williamson, to Doug Burgum, to Perry Johnson, to Chris Christie, to Ron DeSantis, the governor of the state where we are today, who by any measure is not here today in his own state. I will tell you that we have sent this letter, and I'm happy to announce, this is my commitment on January 20th, 2025, if I'm elected the next U.S. president, to pardon Donald J. Trump for these offenses in this federal case. And I have challenged, I have demanded that every other candidate in this race either sign this commitment to pardon on January 20th, 2025, or else to explain why they are not. And I will tell you something. It's going to be difficult for those other candidates to sign this letter. The reason it's going to be difficult for them is the same reason it's difficult for me. The donor class has been calling every Republican candidate and telling us to stay away from this, not to touch it from a 10-foot pole, not to just keep your distance away for Trump. That is what the donor class is telling us. That's what they're telling the other candidates. I refuse to abide by being a disciple of the donor class. I think that we need to declare independence from our donor class in the Republican Party. That is why I challenge every one of the other candidates to actually act on their convictions. If you're not going to pardon President Trump on January 2025, you deserve to say why, and we will hold you accountable, just as we're holding the Biden administration accountable. That's what we need more of in this country. Honesty, integrity, and actual purpose for our country in a way that puts America first, not our political interests first. And I'll close with saying this before I take questions. It would be a lot easier for me as a Republican candidate in this race if Donald Trump were not in it. But I don't want to win this election, unlike others, by eliminating our competition, by a federal administrative police state arresting my opponents. I want to do it the way that our founding fathers believed we should have, starting in 1776. That it is the people of this country, where every person's voice and vote counts equally. That is how we decide who governs this country, not by a federal administrative police state. And I challenge the Biden administration with this FOIA request. I challenge my fellow contenders in this race with this commitment letter to say that we will pardon Trump on January 20th, 2025. And nobody, either Biden or the other contenders in this race, are going to be able to hide from that truth.
And that was Vivek Ramaswamy. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, jd-vance.
Hey guys, jd-vance here. I'm out on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, and I've heard from a lot of people that they're so frustrated, as I am, with the fact that Merrick Garland has used the Department of Justice for politics instead of law. And I think it's time we stop just whining about this problem and debating this problem and actually do something about it. So I've announced today that I will be holding all Department of Justice nominees that Merrick Garland will use, if confirmed, not to enforce the law impartially, which is his duty, but clearly to harass his political opponents. I think that we have to grind this department to a halt until Merrick Garland promises to do his job and stop going after his political opponents. Donald Trump is just one and the most recent example of the fact that Merrick Garland uses his department for political purposes. We have Catholic fathers harassed for their pro-life activism. We, of course, have violent criminals walking the streets after the 2020 summer of riots. And if you're letting the violent criminals go free and you're harassing Christian parents for their political activism, you're not engaged in justice, you're engaged in politics. Let's be honest about that fact, and let's make this department work a little bit more slowly until Merrick Garland changes course and actually does his job the right way.
And that was jd-vance. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand.
11. An Untitled Letter, 1973. The most appropriate title for this discussion would be, I Told You So. But since that would be in somewhat dubious taste, I shall leave this issue of the Ayn Rand letter untitled. In Atlas Shrugged, and in many subsequent articles, I said that the advocates of mysticism are motivated not by a quest for truth, but by hatred for man's mind. That the advocates of altruism are motivated not by compassion for suffering, but by hatred for man's life. That the advocates of collectivism are motivated not by a desire for man's happiness, but by hatred for man. That their three doctrines come from the same root and blend into a single passion, hatred of the good for being good, and that the focus of that hatred, the target of its passionate fury, is the man of ability. Those who thought that I was exaggerating have seen event after event confirm my diagnosis. Reality has been proving me with references and footnotes, including explicit admissions by the advocates of those doctrines. The admissions are becoming progressively louder and clearer.
The major ideological campaigns of the mystic, altruist, collectivist axis are usually preceded by trial balloons that test the public reaction to an attack on certain fundamental principles. Today, a new kind of intellectual balloon is beginning to bubble in the popular press, testing the climate for a large-scale attack intended to obliterate the concept of justice. The new balloons acquire the mark of a campaign by carrying, like little identification tags, the code words, "A new justice." This does not mean that the campaign is consciously directed by some mysterious powers. It is a conspiracy not of men, but of basic premises. And the power directing it is logic. If, at the desperate stage of a losing battle, some men point to a road logically necessitated by their basic premises, those who share the premises will rush to follow. Since my capacity for intellectual slumming is limited, I do not know who originated this campaign at this particular time. Its philosophical roots are ancient. The first instance that came to my attention was a brief news item over a year ago. Dr. Jan Tinbergen from the Netherlands, who had received a Nobel Prize in economic science, spoke at an international conference in New York City and suggested that there be a tax on personal capabilities. A modest first step might be a special tax on persons with high academic scores, he said. We reprinted this item in the horror file of The Objectivist, June 1971. The reaction of my friends, when they read it, was an incredulously indignant amusement, with remarks such as, "He's crazy." But it is not amusing any longer when a news item in the New York Times, January 2nd, 1973, announces that Pope Paul VI issued a call today for a new justice. True justice recognizes that all men are in substance equal, the pontiff said. The littler, the poorer, the more suffering, the more defenseless, even the lower a man has fallen, the more he deserves to be assisted, raised up, cared for, and honored. We learn this from the gospel. Observe the package deal. To be little, poor, suffering, defenseless is not necessarily to be immoral. It depends on the cause of these conditions. But even the lower a man has fallen implies, in this context, not misfortune, but immorality. Are we asked to absorb the notion that the lower a man's vices, the more concern he deserves, and the more honor? Another package deal. To be assisted, raised up, cared for obviously does not apply to those who are great, rich, happy, or strong. They do not need it. But to be honored, they are the men who would have to do the assisting, the raising up, the caring for. But they do not deserve to be honored. They deserve less honor than the man who was saved by their virtues and values. In Atlas Shrugged, exposing the meaning of altruism, John Galt says, "What passkey admits you to the moral elite? The passkey is lack of value. Whatever the value involved, it is your lack of it that gives you a claim upon those who don't lack it. To demand rewards for your virtue is selfish and immoral. It is your lack of virtue that transforms your demand into a moral right. What is an abstract ethical suggestion in the Pope's message becomes specific and political in a brief piece that appeared in the Times on January 20th, 1973. The New Inequality by Peregrine Worsthorne, a columnist for the Sunday Telegraph of London. In addition to altruism, which is its base, this piece was made possible by two premises. One, the refusal to recognize the difference between mind and force, i.e., between economic and political power. And, two, the refusal to recognize the difference between existence and consciousness, i.e., between the metaphysical and the man-made. Those who ignore or evade the crucial importance of these distinctions will find Mr. Peregrine Worsthorne ready to welcome them at the end of their road. There was a time, Mr. Worsthorne begins, when gross,
hereditary inequalities of wealth, status, and power were universally accepted as a divinely ordained fact of life. He is speaking of feudalism and of the British caste system. But modern man, he says, finds this awfully difficult to understand. To him, it seems absolutely axiomatic that each individual ought to be allowed to make his grade according to merit, regardless of the accident of birth. All positions of power, wealth, and status should be open to talent. To the extent that this ideal is achieved, a society is deemed to be just. If you think that this is a proclamation of individualism, think twice. Modern liberals, Mr. Worsthorne continues, have tended to believe it to be fair enough that the man of merit should be on top and the man without merit should be underneath. On top of what? Underneath what? Mr. Worsthorne doesn't say. Judging by the rest of the piece, his answer would be on top of anything. Political power, self-made wealth, scientific achievement, artistic genius, the status of earned respect, or of a government-granted title of nobility. Anything anyone may ever want or envy. The current social malaise, he explains, is caused by the increasing evidence that this assumption about a just society should be challenged. The ideal of a meritocracy no longer commands such universal assent. Meritocracy is an old anti-concept and one of the most contemptible package deals. By means of nothing more than its last 5 letters, that word obliterates the difference between mind and force. It equates the men of ability with political rulers, and the power of their creative achievements with political power. There is no difference, the word suggests, between freedom and tyranny. An aristocracy is tyranny by a politically established elite. A democracy is tyranny by the majority. And when a government protects individual rights, the result is tyranny by talent or merit. And since to merit means to deserve, a free society is ruled by the tyranny of justice. Mr. Worsthorne makes the most of it. His further package dealing becomes easier and cruder. It used to be considered manifestly unjust that a child should be given an enormous head start in life simply because he was the son of an earl or a member of the landed gentry. But what about a child today, born of affluent, educated parents, whose family life gets him off to a head start in the educational ladder? Is he not the beneficiary of a form of hereditary privilege no less unjust than that enjoyed by the aristocracy? What about Thomas Edison, the Wright brothers, Commodore Vanderbilt, Henry Ford Sr., or, in politics, Abraham Lincoln, and their enormous head start in life? On the other hand, what about the Park Avenue hippies, or the drug-eaten children of college-bred intellectuals and multimillionaires? Mr. Worsthorne, it seems, had counted on universal public education to level things down, but it has disappointed him. Family life, he declares, is more important than school life in determining brain power. Educational qualifications are today what armorial quarterings were in feudal times. Yet access to them is almost as unfairly determined by accidents of birth as was access to the nobility. This, he said, defeats any genuine faith in equality of opportunity, and accounts for the current populist clamor to do away with educational distinctions, such as exams and diplomas, since they are seen as the latest form of privilege, which, in a sense, they are. This means that if a young student, named, say, Thomas Hendricks, after days and nights of conscientious study proves that he knows the subject of medicine and passes an exam, he is given an arbitrary privilege, an unfair advantage over a young student named Lee Hunsaker, who spent his time in a drugged daze listening to rock music. And if Hendricks gets a diploma and a job in a hospital, while Hunsaker does not, Hunsaker will scream that he could not help it, and that he never had a chance. Volitional effort? There is no such thing. Brain power? It's determined by family life, and he couldn't help it if Mom and Pop did not condition him to be willing to study. He is entitled to a job in a hospital, and a just society would guarantee it to him. The fate of the patients? He's as good as any other fellow. All men are in substance equal. And the only difference between him and the privileged bastards is a diploma granted as unfairly as armorial quarterings. Equal opportunity? Don't make him laugh. Socialists, Mr. Worsthorne remarks, have used the ideal of equality of opportunity as a way of moving to the right, that is to say, the left direction. They regarded it as the thin end of the egalitarian wedge. Then suddenly Mr. Worsthorne starts dispensing advice to the right, which the left has always insisted on doing, and with good reason. Any rightist who accepts it deserves it. His advice, as usual, involves a threat and counts on fear. But there is a problem here for the right quite as much as for the left. It seems to me certain that there will be a growing awareness in the coming decades of the unfairness of existing society, of the new forms of arbitrary allocation of power, status, and privilege. Resentment will build up against the new meritocracy, just as it built up against the old aristocracy and plutocracy. The right, he claims, must devise new ways of disarming this resentment, without so curbing the high flyers, so penalizing excellence, or so imposing uniformity as to destroy the spirit of a free and dynamic society. Observe that he permits himself to grasp and cynically to admit that such an issue as the penalizing of excellence is involved. But he regards it as the right's concern, not his own. And he does not object to penalizing virtue for being virtue, provided the penalties do not go to extremes. This, in an article written as an appeal for justice. Mr. Worsthorne has a solution to offer to the right, and here comes the full flowering of altruism's essence and purpose, spreading out its petals like a hideous jungle plant, the kind that traps insects and eats them. The purpose is not to burn sacrificial victims, but to have them leap into the furnaces of their own free will. What will be required of the new meritocracy is a formidably revived and reanimated spirit of noblesse oblige, rooted in the recognition that they are immensely privileged and must, as a class, behave accordingly, being prepared to pay a far higher social price in terms of taxation, in terms of service, for the privilege of exercising their talents. Who granted them the privilege of exercising their talents? Those who have no talent. To whom must they pay a higher social price? To those who have no social value to offer. Who will impose taxation on their productive work? Those who have produced nothing. Whom do they have to serve? Those who would be unable to survive without them. Did you want to know who is John Galt? I am the first man of ability who refused to regard it as guilt. I am the first man who would not do penance for my virtues or let them be used as the tools of my destruction. I am the first man who would not suffer martyrdom at the hands of those who wish me to perish for the privilege of keeping them alive. Atlas shrugged. This, the social price, is not an easy idea for a meritocracy to accept, Mr. Worsthorne concludes. They like to think that they deserve their privileges, having won them by their own efforts. But this is an illusion, or at any rate a half-truth. The other half of the truth is that they are terribly lucky, and if their luck is not to run out, they must be prepared to pay much more for their good fortune than they had hoped or even feared. I submit that any man who ascribes success to luck has never achieved anything and has no inkling of the relentless effort which achievement requires. I submit that a successful man who ascribes his own legitimate success in part to luck is either a modest, concrete-bound repressor who does not understand the issue, or an appeaser who tries to mollify the resentment of envious mediocrities. For the nature of such resentment, see my article, The Age of Envy, in The New Left, The Anti-Industrial Revolution. Envy is a widespread sentiment in Europe, not in America. Most Americans admire success. They know what it takes. They believe that one must pay for one's sins, not for one's virtues. And the monstrous notion of paying ransoms for good fortune would not occur to them, nor would they take it seriously. Resentment against meritocracy? Our last presidential election, the landslide against McGovern, was a spectacular demonstration of America's loyalty to achievement on any level, and of resentment against these egalitarian intellectuals who are trying to smuggle this country into a new caste system proposed by their British mentors, a mediocrity. Politically, statism breeds a swarm of little Caesars who are motivated by power lust. Culturally, statism breeds still a lower species, a swarm of little Neros who sing odes to depravity while the lives of their forced audiences go up in smoke. I have said repeatedly that American intellectuals, with rare exceptions, are the slavish dependents and followers of Europe's intellectual trends. The notion of a cultural aristocracy established and financed by the government is so grotesque in this country that one wonders how an article such as Mr. Peregrine Worsthorne's got published here. Can you see any group or class in America posturing about in the spirit of noblesse oblige? Can you see Americans bowing to, say, Sir Burrhus Frederick Skinner or Dame Jane Fonda, thanking them for their charitable contributions? Yet this is the goal of Britain's little Neros and of their American followers. I refer you to the Ayn Rand letter of January 1st, 1973, To Dream the Non-Commercial Dream, for a discussion of why such aristocrats would have a vested interest in altruism and why they would be eager to pay a social price for the privilege of exercising their talents. If by meritocracy, Mr. Worsthorne means a government-picked elite, for instance the BBC, then it is true that such an elite owes its privileges to luck and pull more than to merit. If he means the men of ability who demonstrate their merit in the free marketplace of ideas or of material goods, then his notions are worse than false. Package dealing is essential to the selling of such notions. Mr. Worsthorne's technique consists in making no distinction between these two kinds of merit, which means in seeing no difference between Homer and Nero. An article such as Mr. Worsthorne's, and its various equivalents, would not appear in a newspaper without some heavy academic, philosophical base.
And that was part one of chapter 11 of Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy Who Needs It. And this is a section where it's long on description, short on condemnation, short on judgment. And she pays him, she honors him by describing, by quoting him. He makes a fundamental error, and it's a contradiction. And the contradiction is that he says that the way to justice is through injustice. It's a contradiction in terms, it's a zero, and it should not get any more attention than that. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.